My name is Grace Thompson, and after 5 years of marriage, I still couldn't get pregnant. The doctors said my chances were slim due to an old injury, something I'd never told my husband David about. His stepmother Helen had made it clear from day one that my primary job was producing heirs for the Zhang family legacy. What I didn't know was that Helen's impatience had driven her to take matters into her own hands. She'd started researching fertility drugs and conspiring with Snow Lou, David's childhood friend who'd never gotten over her crush on my husband. Their plan was simple: get David drunk at my birthday party, drug him, and let Snow seduce him into giving the family the grandchildren I couldn't provide. When my friend from the hospital texted me that Helen had been asking about ovulation stimulants for a young woman, I knew something was wrong. When David told me he'd discovered his stepmother buying date-rape drugs, I knew exactly what was happening. But instead of confronting them or having a meltdown, David and I decided to give Helen exactly what she wanted: grandchildren for the Zhang family. Just not the way she expected. The text message came at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Just as I was folding laundry in our Brentwood home, my phone buzzed with a message from Jessica, my college roommate who now worked as a nurse at UCLA Medical Centers. "Hey, Grace. Weird question. Did your mother-in-law come to our fertility clinic today?" A woman matching her description was asking about ovulation stimulants. She had a young blonde woman with her. I stared at the message, my hands going still on the cotton shirt I'd been folding. Helen Zhang asking about fertility drugs. That was unexpected and concerning. Helen had never shown any interest in helping with my fertility issues. In fact, she'd made it abundantly clear over the past 5 years that she considered me defective goods. A woman who'd trapped her precious stepson into a childless marriage. Her exact words at last Christmas dinner had been, "A woman who can't give her husband children is like a tree that bears no fruit. Beautiful to look at, but ultimately useless." David had defended me. Of course, he always did. But Helen's disapproval hung over our marriage like a persistent fog, coloring every family gathering and holiday celebration. I was still processing Jessica's message when I heard David's key in the front door. He was home early from his law firm, which usually meant either very good news or very bad news. "Grace," he called out, his voice carrying an edge I recognized as barely controlled anger. "In the bedroom," I replied, setting down my phone. David appeared in the doorway, his usually immaculate suit slightly wrinkled, his dark hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. At 32, my husband was still devastatingly handsome, the kind of man who turned heads at restaurants and made other women wonder what he saw in plain, ordinary me. "We need to talk," he said, loosening his tie. "About my stepmother." My stomach dropped. "What about her?" "Sit down." I perched on the edge of our king-sized bed, watching as David paced to the window overlooking our garden. He had the same restless energy he got before big court cases, but this felt different, more personal. "I got a call from my cousin Kevin today," David began, his back still turned to me. "He wanted to know if I was planning to have kids anytime soon. That's not unusual. Your family's been asking that question for years." Kevin said Helen asked him to lend me money. When he asked why, she told him not to mention it to me. She said she was planning something special for my birthday next week, something that would solve our family's biggest problem. The laundry basket slipped from my lap. What did Kevin tell her? He told her he didn't have any extra cash, but he was curious enough to follow her. David turned around, his expression grim. "Grace, she went to 3 different pharmacies yesterday. And she wasn't alone. Who was with her? Snow Liu. The name hit me like a physical blow. Snow Liu, Helen's distant relative, David's childhood friend, and the woman who'd been in love with my husband since they were teenagers. Beautiful, wealthy Snow, who'd never bothered to hide her disdain for me or her belief that David had married beneath himself. What were they buying? I asked, though I was starting to piece together the horrifying picture. David pulled out his phone and showed me a photo Kevin had taken from across the street. Helen and Snow emerging from a pharmacy, Snow carrying a small paper bag, both women looking around nervously. Kevin followed them to 2 more pharmacies. Same routine each time. Small purchases. Cash only. Looking over their shoulders like they were doing something illegal. I thought about Jessica's message. David, I need to show you something. I handed him my phone, watching his face darken as he read the text from my friend. Jesus Christ, he muttered. Ovulation stimulants in pharmacy runs. Grace, I think my stepmother is planning to drug me. The words hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. Helen Zhang, the woman who'd raised David from age 10 after his mother died, was planning to facilitate his rape. Not for money, not for revenge, but for grandchildren. The birthday party, I whispered. She insisted on hosting it at the family estate. She said she wanted to make up for all the years she'd been difficult. David nodded grimly. I should have known it was too good to be true. Helen doesn't do anything without an ulterior motive. I stood up, pacing to the window myself. The afternoon sun was streaming through our gauze curtains, casting everything in a warm, golden light that felt obscene given what we were discussing. So, what do we do? I asked. Confront her. Cancel the party. Call the police. The police would need proof. Right now. All we have is suspicion and a few pharmacy purchases that could be explained away. David sat heavily on the bed, and confronting her directly would just make her more careful next time. Next time, I spun around to face him. David, there can't be a next time. If she's really planning to drug you, then we need to beat her at her own game. Something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. David had the same expression he wore when he'd found a loophole in a case everyone thought was unwinnable. What are you thinking? I'm thinking my stepmother wants grandchildren. And Snow wants me. He stood up, walking over to take my hands in his. What if we give them exactly what they want? Just not the way they expect. I don't understand. David's smile was cold and calculating. Grace, my stepmother isn't the only one who can play games. She wants to drug me and put Snow in my bed. Fine, but what if the person in that bed isn't me? Who would it be? My father. I stared at him. Your father, David, he's 62 years old. He's also been married to Helen for 15 years. And he's still active. Trust me, I hear more about their relationship than I ever wanted to. David's expression grew more determined. Helen wants Zhang family grandchildren. She'll get them. Snow will definitely get pregnant. But those children won't be mine, they'll be my father's. The audacity of it took my breath away. David, that's diabolical. It's justice. Helen wants to destroy our marriage for the sake of continuing the family line. Instead, she'll get what she wants while destroying her own marriage. Snow will get pregnant, but she'll be carrying the child of a man old enough to be her grandfather. And she'll be responsible for breaking up the marriage of the woman who helped orchestrate the whole thing. I sat back down on the bed, trying to process the implications, but how would we even pull that off? Your father would have to be drunk enough to not realize what's happening. and Snow would have to not realize she's with the wrong person. Leave that to me. I've been watching Helen plan elaborate schemes my entire adult life. I know how her mind works. David knelt in front of me, taking my hands again. Grace, I know this sounds crazy, but think about it. Helen has been making your life miserable for 5 years. She's convinced that you're not good enough for me, that our marriage is worthless because we don't have children. She's willing to drug me and orchestrate an affair to get what she wants. And you want to let her? I want to let her think she's getting what she wants. Right up until the moment she realizes she's destroyed everything she actually cares about. I looked into my husband's eyes, seeing the same protective fury that had drawn me to him in the first place. David Zhang didn't just love me. He was willing to go to war for me. It's risky. I said, finally, everything worth doing is risky. If we get caught, we won't get caught. And even if we do, what's the worst that happens? Helen and Snow get exposed for planning to drug me and destroy our marriage. My father finds out his wife is willing to pimp out another woman to get grandchildren. Snow has to live with the consequences of sleeping with a man she thought was me, but who's actually old enough to be her grandfather. I was quiet for a long moment, thinking through all the ways this could go wrong. But I was also thinking about 5 years of Helen's subtle cruelty, 5 years of feeling like a failure because my body couldn't give David children, 5 years of watching Snow Liu circle my marriage like a vulture, waiting for her chance. What would I have to do? I asked. David's smile was both loving and ruthless. Just be yourself, Grace. Helen will handle everything else. She's been planning this for weeks. All we have to do is make sure the right man ends up in that bedroom. And afterward, we sit back and watch Helen get everything she asked for, delivered in exactly the way she deserves. I thought about the text from Jessica, about Helen's cold dismissal of our childless marriage, about Snow's confident assumption that she could take my husband whenever she wanted. Okay, I said finally, let's do it. David leaned forward and kissed me, soft and sweet and full of promise. I love you, Grace Thompson. And after next week, everyone will know exactly how much. As evening fell over our Brentwood home, David and I began planning the most elaborate revenge scheme of our lives. Helen Zhang wanted to play games with our marriage. She was about to learn that some games have consequences she never saw coming. The next few days passed in a strange state of heightened awareness. David and I went through the motions of our normal routine. He went to the law firm. I worked on my freelance graphic design projects, but underneath the surface, we were planning something that would either be brilliant or catastrophic. We need to be absolutely certain about the timing. David said Thursday evening as we sat in his home office, legal pads covered with notes spread across his mahogany desk. One wrong move and the whole thing falls apart. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been researching the effects of Rohypnol and other date rape drugs. According to this, most of these substances take effect within 15 to 30 minutes. Helen will probably slip something into your drink during dinner, expecting you to be incapacitated by the time dessert is served, which means I need to switch places with my father between the main course and dessert. David leaned back in his leather chair, running calculations in his head. The guest bathroom is right next to my father's study. If I can get him drunk enough on wine during dinner, I can help him rest in his study while I disappear through the back corridors. The Zhang family estate was a sprawling Mediterranean-style mansion in Beverly Hills, built in the 1920s and renovated twice since David's grandfather bought it. I'd only been there a handful of times. Helen preferred to keep family gatherings small and exclusive. But David had grown up in that house. He knew every hidden passage and service corridor. "What about the cameras?" I asked. David pulled out his phone and showed me the app he'd downloaded. "I installed them yesterday while Helen was at her book club. One in the guest bedroom, where she's planning to stage the encounter, one in my father's study, and one in the hallway between them. Won't she notice them? These are smaller than a quarter and designed to look like smoke detectors." Helen's never been particularly observant about security systems. His smile was grim. "She's too focused on manipulating people to pay attention to technology." I closed my laptop and moved to the window. Our Brentwood neighborhood was quiet at this hour, the kind of expensive serenity that money could buy. In 3 days, we'd be at the Jang estate, watching Helen's plan unfold while secretly orchestrating our own. "David, what if your father remembers, even drunk? He might realize my father has been having memory issues when it comes to his affairs for decades. It's how he's stayed married to Helen this long." David's voice carried a bitter edge. "Trust me, even if he remembers sleeping with someone, he won't remember who it was, and he certainly won't volunteer the information to Helen." I turned back to face him. "You really think this will work?" "I think Helen is so convinced of her own cleverness that she won't see it coming. She's been planning this for weeks, maybe months. She's invested in this narrative where she's the mastermind saving the Zhang family legacy. And Snow sees what she wants to see. She's been fantasizing about sleeping with me since we were teenagers. If she's drugged and in a dark room with someone who looks like me, she'll believe it's me until it's too late." The casual way he discussed Snow's delusions made me realize something I'd never fully articulated. David had never been attracted to her, not even as a teenager. All these years, I'd been insecure about their history, but there had never been any real competition. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Anything. Why didn't you ever tell me that Snow means nothing to you? I've spent 5 years being jealous of a woman you've never even been tempted by." David stood up and walked over to me, pulling me into his arms. "Because I liked that you were a little jealous. It meant you cared enough to worry about losing me. You're terrible. I'm honest. Grace, you're the only woman I've ever loved. Snow Liu is beautiful, wealthy, and completely vapid. She has the personality of expensive wallpaper. Your stepmother seems to think she'd make you a better wife. My stepmother thinks a lot of things that aren't true, like the idea that drugging your stepson to force him into an affair is an acceptable way to get grandchildren." I rested my head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "After this weekend, our lives are going to be very different. They're going to be better. Helen will be out of our lives. Snow will be disgraced, and maybe we'll finally have some peace. And if I'm never able to get pregnant, will you still think our lives are better?" David pulled back to look at me, his hands framing my face. "Grace, I married you because I love you, not your uterus, not your ability to produce heirs for the Zhang dynasty. If we never have children, I'll be disappointed, but I won't be incomplete. You're all I need." Friday morning brought an unexpected phone call from Helen herself. "Grace, dear." Her voice was sickeningly sweet through the phone speaker. "I wanted to confirm the menu for Sunday's party. I know you have dietary restrictions. I didn't have dietary restrictions." This was Helen's polite way of reminding me that I wasn't really part of the family. "Whatever you think is best." Helen, it's your party." "Oh, but it's David's birthday. I want everything to be perfect for my dear stepson." There was something almost giddy in her voice. I've planned such a special evening. Very intimate, very family-oriented. How many people will be there? Just immediate family, Robert, myself, David, you, and Snow, of course. She's been so helpful with the planning. Of course she had been. That sounds lovely. Can I bring anything? Just yourself, dear. And perhaps you could wear that blue dress. The one from David's law firm Christmas party. You looked so appropriate in it. Appropriate. Not beautiful, not elegant. Appropriate. I'll see what I can find. I said, wonderful. Oh, and Grace. David's been working so hard lately. I do hope he'll be able to relax and really enjoy himself Sunday night. The double meaning was so obvious it was almost insulting. I'm sure he will. Helen, David knows how to appreciate unexpected surprises. There was a pause. Helen wasn't sure if I was being naive or deliberately obtuse. Yes, well, we'll see you Sunday at 6. After she hung up, I immediately called David at his office. She called to confirm the party details. I told him, and to make sure you'll be relaxed enough to enjoy yourself. As subtle as a brick through a window. Did she say anything else? She wants me to wear my blue dress. The appropriate one. David was quiet for a moment. She wants you to look dowdy, less threatening. Mission accomplished. I've looked dowdy for 5 years. Grace, I'm kidding. Mostly. I walked to our bedroom and pulled the blue dress from my closet. It was conservative, shapeless, and made me look like a suburban mom trying too hard to fit in at a country club. David, what if she's right? What if I really am just appropriate? Then I have terrible taste in women, and my law school classmates were lying when they said I married up. Despite everything, I smiled. You married up, significantly. Grace, you are brilliant, beautiful, and infinitely more interesting than anyone else in my family. Helen is threatened by you because she knows that in any fair comparison, you come out ahead. She's about to find out just how far ahead. Saturday evening, David made his final preparations. I watched him test the camera feeds on his phone, check the batteries on the recording devices, and review the floor plan of his father's house one more time. The guest bedroom has blackout curtains. He murmured, more to himself than to me. Good. The darker it is, the less likely Snow is to notice the switch. What about your father? How do you know he'll be in the right place at the right time? Because I know his routine. Sunday night is his poker night with his buddies from the country club. He always comes home around 11, slightly drunk and looking for an excuse to avoid Helen. If I tell him I need to talk to him privately about something important, he'll go to his study without question. And then I help him get comfortable, turn off the lights, and leave him there to sleep it off. When Snow comes looking for me, she'll find someone in that room. Assume it's me, and Helen gets exactly what she's been planning. Just not the way she expected. David nodded, his expression grim. Justice served cold. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. The kind of perfect California day that made tourists think everyone in Los Angeles lived in a perpetual state of happiness. I spent the morning trying to eat breakfast, failing to concentrate on a book, and obsessively checking my appearance in the mirror. The blue dress was exactly as unflattering as I remembered, combined with minimal makeup and my hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. I looked like exactly what Helen wanted me to look like. The plain, unremarkable wife who didn't deserve her perfect stepson. You ready for this? David asked as we got into his Tesla for the drive to Beverly Hills. No, but I'm ready for it to be over. After tonight, it will be, one way or another, everything changes after tonight. As we drove through the gates of the Jang estate, I saw Snow's white BMW parked in the circular driveway. She was already here, probably helping Helen with last-minute preparations. The house looked exactly as imposing as I remembered 3 stories of cream-colored stone and red tile roofing, with perfectly manicured grounds that screamed old money and older secrets. "Showtime," David murmured as we parked. Helen opened the front door before we could ring the bell, resplendent in a cream silk blouse and pearls. Every inch the grand lady of the manor. "David, Grace, you look—" Her eyes swept over my dowdy appearance with satisfaction. "Lovely, dear." Snow appeared behind her like a vision in white, a flowing dress that highlighted every curve, her long black hair cascading over her shoulders, her makeup flawless. She looked like she was attending a wedding where she fully expected to be the star. "David," she breathed, stepping forward to air-kiss his cheeks. "You look wonderful, very handsome." The way she said it made my skin crawl, but David just smiled politely. "Snow, thank you for helping Helen with the party." "Oh, it's my pleasure. I just want everything to be perfect for your special day." She meant it. Snow Lou genuinely believed that tonight was going to be the night she finally got everything she'd ever wanted. She had no idea she was right. The dining room of the Jang estate was set for an intimate family dinner, complete with Helen's finest china and crystal glasses that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers, and the lighting was dim enough to create atmosphere while still being bright enough to see faces clearly. Robert Jang sat at the head of the table, looking distinguished in his navy blazer and silver tie. At 62, David's father was still handsome in that aging movie star way that money and good genetics could buy. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, and his smile was charming enough to make you forget that he'd been married 4 times. "Happy birthday." "Son," he said, raising his wine glass as we took our seats. 32 years old. "I remember when you were learning to walk." "Thank you, Dad." David's smile was genuine, despite everything we knew was coming. Whatever else Robert was, he'd been a decent father to David after his mother died. Helen positioned herself directly across from David, while Snow claimed the seat to his right. I was relegated to the far end of the table, close enough to observe but far enough away to be easily ignored. "I hope everyone's hungry," Helen announced as the housekeeper began serving the first course. I had Maria prepare all of David's favorites. The meal was elaborate pan-seared scallops with cauliflower puree, followed by herb-crusted lamb with roasted vegetables, accompanied by a wine selection that probably cost more than my car. Helen played the perfect hostess, keeping conversation flowing while subtly steering the topic toward family legacy and the importance of children. "Robert and I were just discussing the Hendersons' new grandson last week," she said as we finished the appetizer course. "Such a lovely baby." It made us both think about how wonderful it would be to have children running around this house again. Robert nodded absently, already on his 3rd glass of wine. Nothing brings a family together like children. Snow leaned toward David, her hand briefly touching his arm. "I've always loved children. I think about having a family someday. With the right person, of course." Her meaning couldn't have been clearer if she'd taken out a billboard. I watched David's jaw tighten slightly, but his voice remained pleasant. "Children are a blessing," he said carefully, "when the time is right. And with the right partner." He reached across the table to squeeze my hand. a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by anyone. Helen's smile became slightly strained, while Snow's eyes flashed with something that might have been jealousy or determination. As Maria cleared the appetizer plates, I noticed Helen making a brief trip to the kitchen. She returned just as the main course was being served, settling back into her seat with the satisfied expression of someone who just completed an important task. The lamb was perfectly prepared, tender and flavorful, but I found it difficult to concentrate on the food. I was too busy watching Helen's face as she monitored David's wine consumption. Every time his glass emptied, she was quick to refill it, encouraging him to try different vintages from Robert's collection. "This Cabernet is exceptional," she said, pouring another generous serving into David's glass. "Robert brought it back from Napa last month. You really must try it." "David, I shouldn't drink too much," David protested mildly. "I have to drive home later." "Nonsense," Helen waved away his concern. "You can always stay the night if needed. Your old room is exactly as you left it." I caught David's eye across the table. This was it, Helen's first move. She wanted him drunk enough to be malleable, but she was also providing an excuse for him to stay overnight. "Well, when you put it that way," David lifted the glass to his lips and took a long sip. "This really is excellent wine." Helen beamed with satisfaction. The conversation continued through the main course, with Helen and Snow taking turns steering the discussion toward topics that painted me in an unflattering light. My failed attempts at gardening, my lack of social connections in Los Angeles, my quiet personality that Robert described as refreshingly understated, which everyone understood to mean boring. I played my part, smiling politely and speaking only when directly addressed. Let them think I was the mousy, unremarkable wife who didn't deserve David. It would make their downfall that much more satisfying. As Maria began clearing the dinner plates, I noticed David starting to act slightly different. His movements were becoming more deliberate, his smile a little too wide, his voice just a fraction louder than normal. To anyone watching, he was exhibiting the early signs of intoxication. What Helen didn't know was that David had switched glasses with Robert twice during dinner. While his father was distracted by conversation, the wine that was supposed to be affecting David was actually affecting his father, who was now noticeably flushed and slightly unsteady. "I think I need some air," Robert announced, pushing back from the table. That wine hit me harder than expected. "Dad, are you okay?" David asked, concern evident in his voice. Fine. Just need to step out for a minute." Robert stood up, swaying slightly. "Maybe rest in my study for a bit." David immediately stood to help him. "Here, let me walk you there. You don't look steady on your feet." "I can help," Helen offered. But David was already guiding his father toward the study. "No need. Helen, I've got him. You stay and entertain the ladies." As they disappeared down the hallway, I caught the meaningful look David shot me over his shoulder. Phase 1 was complete. Robert was drunk and positioned exactly where he needed to be. Snow watched them go with obvious frustration. She'd probably been hoping for more one-on-one time with David during dinner. But Helen's plan required patience. "Poor Robert," Helen said, though she didn't sound particularly concerned. "He's been working so hard lately. The stress must be affecting his tolerance for alcohol. Should we check on them?" I asked innocently. "Oh, David can handle his father. He's such a good son that way." Helen's smile was predatory. "Why don't we move to the living room for dessert and coffee? I have a beautiful chocolate cake from that French bakery on Rodeo Drive." Snow nodded eagerly. "That sounds perfect." I'm sure David will join us when he's finished helping his father. We relocated to the living room, where Helen had arranged the seating to create intimate conversation areas. She positioned Snow on the main sofa and took the armchair closest to it, while I was directed to a chair that was technically part of the group, but somehow felt separate. Grace, dear, would you mind helping me in the kitchen? Helen asked after we'd been sitting for a few minutes. I could use an extra pair of hands with the coffee service. This was clearly a setup to get me out of the room so Helen could brief Snow on the next phase of their plan. I pretended not to notice. Of course, I said. Standing up, I'd be happy to help. In the kitchen, Helen busied herself with an elaborate coffee service while speaking in low, urgent tones. David seemed a bit affected by the wine at dinner, she said, not looking at me directly. I think he might need to lie down soon. He did seem tired. I agreed. Maybe I should take him home. Oh no, that wouldn't be safe if he's been drinking. He should definitely stay here tonight. Helen's voice was firm. Snow has offered to help keep an eye on him. Make sure he gets settled comfortably. The audacity was breathtaking. Helen was literally telling me that another woman was going to keep an eye on my drunk husband while he slept in his childhood bedroom. That's very thoughtful of Snow, I said mildly. She's always been so caring when it comes to David. They have such a special friendship. When we returned to the living room with the coffee service, David was back, looking slightly disheveled and more obviously affected by the alcohol. How's your father? Helen asked. Passed out in his study. David replied, his words just slightly slurred. I got him settled on the couch in there. He should sleep it off. Perfect, Helen said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Everything was going according to her plan. Robert was unconscious and out of the way. David was drunk and vulnerable, and Snow was positioned to swoop in as his caretaker. David accepted a cup of coffee and settled onto the sofa next to Snow, who immediately moved closer to him under the pretense of offering assistance. You look tired, she said softly, her hand resting on his arm. Maybe you should get some rest. I am feeling a bit strange, David admitted, leaning back against the sofa cushions. Must have had more wine than I thought. Helen practically vibrated with excitement. Snow, dear, would you mind helping David to his room? Grace and I can finish cleaning up down here. This was it, the moment of truth. Helen was sending Snow upstairs with David, expecting her to seduce him while he was incapacitated. What she didn't know was that David was stone-cold sober and about to pull off the greatest bait and switch in family history. That's very kind of Snow, I said, playing my part perfectly. I appreciate the help. Snow stood up, offering David her arm. Come on, let me get you upstairs. You'll feel better after some rest. David allowed her to help him up, swaying slightly for effect. Thank you. Snow, you're very sweet. As they headed toward the staircase, I noticed David's subtle gesture toward the hallway that led to his father's study. He was telling me to get into position to monitor the cameras. Helen, would it be all right if I use the powder room? I asked. Of course. Dear, you know where it is. I made my way to the guest bathroom near Robert's study, where I could access the camera feeds on my phone without being observed. My hands were shaking as I opened the app David had shown me. The screen split into 3 views: the guest bedroom where Snow expected to seduce David, the study where Robert was passed out on the leather couch, and the hallway between them. On the hallway camera, I could see David and Snow making their way upstairs. Snow's arm wrapped around David's waist in a gesture that was supposed to look supportive, but came across as possessive. In 10 minutes, Helen's elaborate plan would be in motion. She just had no idea how spectacularly it was about to backfire. I locked the powder room door and pulled out my phone with trembling fingers. The camera app loaded, showing me 3 crystal-clear feeds from the hidden devices David had installed. This was it, the moment when Helen's plan would either succeed spectacularly or backfire in ways she never imagined. On the hallway camera, I watched Snow guide David up the stairs, her body pressed close to his as she whispered what she probably thought were comforting words. David played his part perfectly, leaning on her just enough to seem unsteady while maintaining enough control to execute our plan. Just a little further, I could hear Snow saying through the audio feed, "You'll feel so much better once you lie down." They reached the top of the stairs and turned toward the guest wing. David had told me this part would be the trickiest he needed to separate from Snow long enough to make the switch without arousing her suspicion. "Snow." David's voice came through slightly slurred. "I need to use the bathroom first. Can you wait for me in the bedroom?" "Of course," she replied, her voice honey-sweet with anticipated triumph. "I'll get everything ready for you." I switched to the guest bedroom camera and watched Snow enter the room David had slept in as a teenager. She moved with purpose, dimming the lights until the room was bathed in soft shadows, then settling herself on the edge of the bed in a pose that was clearly meant to be seductive. Meanwhile, the hallway camera showed David slipping away from the guest wing and heading toward his father's study. His drunken stumbling disappeared the moment he was out of Snow's sight, replaced by the quick, efficient movements of a man on a mission. I switched to the study camera and saw Robert exactly where David had left him, passed out on the leather couch. His jacket loosened, his silver hair mussed from sleep. He looked older in the dim light, but the resemblance to David was still striking. In a dark room, to someone who expected to find David, David entered the study quietly, moving to his father's side. I watched him gently shake Robert's shoulder. "Dad," he whispered. "Dad, wake up for a second." Robert stirred, opening bleary eyes. "David." "What? What time is it?" "Late." "Dad, I need you to do something for me." "Can you walk?" "I think so." Robert struggled to sit up, still obviously intoxicated. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I just need you to lie down in the guest bedroom for a while. The couch in here isn't comfortable enough for a full night's sleep." Robert looked confused but compliant. "The guest bedroom? Just for tonight?" "I'll explain everything tomorrow." I watched David help his father to his feet, supporting most of his weight as they made their way toward the door. Robert was cooperative but clearly confused, the kind of drunk that follows instructions without really understanding them. They moved slowly down the hallway, David carefully timing their approach to avoid any chance encounters with Helen or me. When they reached the guest bedroom door, David paused. "Dad, there might be someone in there. A friend who's been helping Helen tonight. Just don't worry about it." "Okay, just go to sleep." Robert nodded vaguely. "Okay, son, whatever you say." David opened the door and guided his father inside. Through the bedroom camera, I watched Snow look up expectantly as the door opened, her face lighting up with anticipation. The room was dark enough that she could see a male figure entering, but not clear enough to make out specific features. "David," she breathed, standing up from the bed. "I was waiting for you." Robert, still drunk and disoriented, saw a beautiful woman in a white dress approaching him. In his altered state, with his inhibitions lowered by alcohol, he responded exactly as David had predicted. "Well, hello there," Robert said, his voice carrying the same deep timbre as David's. "Aren't you lovely?" Snow moved closer, and I realized she was interpreting Robert's slightly different manner as David being affected by the drugs Helen had slipped him. She probably thought he was just disoriented enough to be more forward than usual. "I've been waiting for this for so long," she whispered, reaching for him. I watched in horrified fascination as Snow began seducing the wrong man entirely. In the dim light, with both of them affected by alcohol and assumption, neither of them questioned what was happening. David, meanwhile, had slipped out of the bedroom and was making his way back downstairs through the service corridors he'd grown up using. I quickly switched to the main living room camera, where Helen was pacing impatiently, checking her watch every few seconds. "Grace, dear," Helen called toward the powder room. "Is everything all right in there?" "Just finishing up," I called back, flushing the toilet for effect. I quickly switched the camera app to sleep mode and opened a random game on my phone instead. In case Helen asked to see what I was doing, I emerged from the powder room to find Helen practically vibrating with nervous energy. "They've been upstairs for quite a while," she said, unable to keep the excitement out of her voice. "Snow is being very thorough in her care. She's always been attentive." I agreed mildly. David is lucky to have such a caring friend. Helen's smile was predatory. "Yes, he is very lucky indeed." We returned to the living room, where Helen made a show of cleaning up the coffee service while clearly listening for sounds from upstairs. I picked up a magazine and pretended to read. Though my mind was racing with what I'd witnessed on the cameras, approximately 45 minutes later, David reappeared, looking disheveled and slightly confused, playing the part of a man who'd just woken up from a drug-induced sleep. "What happened?" he asked, running his hands through his hair. "I feel like I passed out." Helen's eyes lit up with triumph. "Oh, you poor dear. You had too much wine with dinner. Snow helped you upstairs to rest." "Snow." David looked around the room. "Where is she?" "Still upstairs, I believe." "Making sure you were comfortable?" David frowned, as if trying to piece together fragmented memories. "I should thank her. And check on my father. Your father is fine," Helen said quickly, still sleeping in his study. "Why don't you sit down for a moment? You still look a bit unsteady." But David was already heading back upstairs, and I could see the barely contained glee on Helen's face. She thought he was going back for round 2 with Snow. She thought her plan had worked perfectly. We both followed David upstairs. Helen because she couldn't resist witnessing her triumph, and me because I needed to be there for what came next. David knocked on the guest bedroom door. "Snow, are you okay?" There was a rustling sound from inside. Then Snow's voice, slightly breathless. "David, is that you? Can I come in?" Just give me a second." When the door finally opened, Snow appeared looking thoroughly disheveled, her white dress wrinkled, her hair messed, her lipstick smudged. She had the satisfied, glowing look of a woman who thought she'd just achieved her life's greatest ambition. "David," she said softly, reaching for him. "That was incredible." David stepped back, his expression shifting from confusion to something harder. "Snow, what are you talking about? Don't be shy now." She laughed, moving closer. "After what we just shared, Snow," David's voice was sharp now, cutting through her fantasy. "I need you to think very carefully about what just happened here." Something in his tone made her pause. "What do you mean?" David reached into the bedroom and turned on the overhead light. The sudden brightness made everyone squint, but when our eyes adjusted, we could all see clearly into the room. Robert Zhang was lying on the bed, fully clothed but obviously disheveled. Snoring peacefully in a wine-induced stupor, Snow looked from Robert to David, her face cycling through confusion, realization, and growing horror. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not possible." Helen pushed past us into the room, stopping short when she saw her husband passed out on the bed that was supposed to contain her stepson and his seductress. "What is Robert doing here?" she demanded. "David, what is your father doing in this room?" David's smile was cold and utterly without mercy. "He's sleeping off the wine." "Helen, the wine you kept pouring for me at dinner, thinking you were getting me drunk enough for Snow to take advantage of me. I don't understand," Helen stammered. But I could see in her eyes that she was beginning to. "Don't you?" David pulled out his phone and opened the camera app. "Maybe this will help clarify things." He showed her the screen, which displayed the recorded footage from earlier in the evening. Helen's face went white as she watched herself orchestrating the evening, Snow preparing to seduce who she thought was David, and Robert stumbling into the bedroom in David's place. "You see, Helen, I knew about your plan from the beginning. The drugged wine, the setup, Snow's role in your little scheme. I just made one small adjustment." Snow was staring at Robert in absolute horror. "Oh my God. Oh my God. I slept with. He's old enough to be my grandfather." "Actually," David said conversationally, "he's exactly old enough to be your grandfather." "Congratulations." "Snow, you got what you always wanted, a night of passion with a Zhang family man. You just got the wrong generation." Helen found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "You did this on purpose. I gave you exactly what you asked for. Helen, you wanted Snow to seduce a Zhang man so she could get pregnant and give you grandchildren. Mission accomplished. Snow will definitely be pregnant after tonight. Robert's quite virile for his age, and those children will absolutely be Zhang family heirs." The implications hit Helen like a physical blow. Those children would be your half-siblings. Yes, and Robert's children with another woman. I wonder how that's going to affect your marriage. Helen. Snow started crying great, heaving sobs that filled the room. "This can't be happening. This can't be real." "Oh, it's very real," David assured her. "And it's all been recorded for posterity. Every moment of Helen's plan, every detail of your willing participation in what you thought was the drugged seduction of a married man." Robert stirred on the bed, opening bleary eyes and looking around the room in confusion. "What's everyone doing here? What time is it?" The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Helen spoke, her voice barely audible. "Robert, what were you doing in this room?" Robert sat up slowly, his gaze moving from his wife to Snow to David to me. Even drunk, he wasn't stupid enough to miss the implications of the scene. "I think," he said carefully, "I should probably ask you the same question. Helen." And with that simple response, Helen's world, the world she'd spent months carefully constructing to destroy mine, came crashing down around her. The silence in that bedroom stretched like a taut wire, threatening to snap under the weight of what had just been revealed. Robert Zhang sat on the edge of the bed, his silver hair disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled, looking every inch the distinguished man who'd just discovered his wife had orchestrated his infidelity. "Helen," he said again, his voice gaining strength as sobriety crept in. "I asked you a question. What were you doing in this room?" Helen's face had gone through several color changes in the past few minutes, from triumphant flush to horrified pale to sickly green. Now she looked like a trapped animal, her eyes darting between her husband, her stepson, and the woman she'd helped maneuver into bed with the wrong man. "Robert, darling, this is all a misunderstanding," she began, her voice high and strained. "I was just checking on David. Cut the bullshit." "Helen," the profanity from Robert's lips shocked everyone into silence. In 15 years of marriage, I'd never heard David's father use language like that in front of family. "David just showed me security footage of you drugging wine, positioning people like chess pieces, and orchestrating what amounts to sexual assault." Robert stood up, swaying slightly but managing to maintain his dignity. "So I'll ask you one more time. What the hell were you doing?" Snow had collapsed into the bedroom's armchair, her white dress now looking more like a costume from a tragic play than the seductive outfit she'd planned. Her makeup was smeared, her hair was a mess, and she was crying in great, heaving sobs that made it difficult to understand her words. I thought it was David." She kept repeating, "I would never. I'm not that kind of person. I thought it was David." "But you were perfectly willing to sleep with a drugged, married man," I said quietly from the doorway. It was the first time I'd spoken since the revelation, and my voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Everyone turned to look at me dowdy. Unremarkable grace in her appropriate blue dress. "Excuse me." Snow looked up through her tears. "You heard me." I stepped into the room, feeling stronger and clearer than I had in years. "You thought David was drugged. You thought he was incapacitated. You thought he couldn't consent to what you were doing. And you did it anyway." Snow's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "That's rape." "Snow, what you planned to do to my husband, what you thought you were doing, was rape. The fact that you accidentally raped his father instead doesn't make you any less of a predator." "Grace," Helen started, but I held up my hand. "No, you don't get to talk right now." "Helen, you've talked enough for one lifetime." I looked around the room at the 3 people who'd tried to destroy my marriage. "Did you really think I didn't know? Did you think I was too stupid? Too plain, too unremarkable to figure out what you were planning?" David moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine. "Grace, let me finish." I squeezed his hand but kept my eyes on Helen. 5 years of your little comments about my inability to give David children. 5 years of you treating me like a disappointing purchase that couldn't be returned. 5 years of you making me feel like I wasn't good enough for your precious stepson. Helen's face was crumbling, but I wasn't finished. "You want to know something funny? Helen, the injury that makes it difficult for me to get pregnant. It happened when I was 19. A hit-and-run accident that damaged my reproductive system and almost killed me. But I survived, and I built a life. And I found a man who loves me exactly as I am." I could see understanding dawning in Helen's eyes, the realization that she'd spent 5 years tormenting a woman for something that was never her fault. "And you," I turned to Snow, "spent 5 years circling my marriage like a vulture, waiting for your chance to swoop in. Well, congratulations. You finally got your chance, and you blew it spectacularly." Snow flinched as if I'd slapped her. Robert had been listening to this exchange with growing anger, his face darkening as the full scope of his wife's betrayal became clear. "Let me see if I understand this correctly," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Helen, you drugged my son's wine with the intention of incapacitating him so that this woman could sexually assault him, all because you wanted grandchildren." "Robert, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" how you were willing to destroy your stepson's marriage, how you were willing to facilitate rape, how you turned our home into a crime scene. Helen started crying then, but they weren't the delicate tears of a refined lady. They were ugly, desperate sobs of a woman watching her world collapse. I just wanted our family to continue, she wailed. I wanted David to have children, to carry on the Jiang name. Grace can't give him that. That wasn't your decision to make. Robert roared, his composure finally breaking. David's marriage, David's children, David's life, none of that was ever your business. But the family legacy. Robert laughed bitterly. Helen, I have 7 children from 4 different relationships. The Jiang name isn't exactly in danger of dying out. This was news to me. I knew Robert had been married before Helen. But 7 children. I glanced at David, who nodded grimly. Dad doesn't like to talk about his other families, David said quietly. But you're right. Helen, the legacy is secure. It always has been. Helen looked like she'd been slapped. 7 children. You never told me. You never asked. You were so focused on what David could give you that you never bothered to learn about what I'd already given the world. Snow had stopped crying and was now staring at all of us with the expression of someone who just realized she'd been played by everyone in the room. Wait, she said slowly. Wait. You all knew what was going to happen tonight. Not all of us, David said. Grace and I figured out your plan with Helen a few days ago. We decided to let you go through with it, just with a small modification. Snow's voice was rising toward hysteria. You let me sleep with your father. You let me believe. She trailed off, the full horror of the situation settling over her. We let you reveal who you really are, I said calmly. A woman willing to rape a married man for the chance to steal someone else's life. I'm not a rapist. What would you call having sex with someone who's too intoxicated to consent? Snow had no answer for that. Robert had moved to the window and was staring out at the estate grounds, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture I recognized from David when he was thinking through complex legal problems. Helen, he said without turning around, I want you out of this house tonight. Robert, please tonight, pack whatever you can carry and leave. We'll discuss the details of our divorce through lawyers. You can't be serious. This is my home. Robert turned around, and his expression was colder than anything I'd ever seen from him. This house belongs to the Jiang Family Trust. You were a beneficiary only as long as you were my wife. As of tonight, you're no longer my wife in any way that matters. But I love you. You love the lifestyle I provide. You love the social status. You love being Mrs. Robert Jiang. But you don't love me. Helen, if you loved me, you never would have set up this elaborate scheme to have another woman seduce my son. The truth of his words hung in the air like smoke. Helen had never loved Robert. She'd loved what he represented. And now that she'd lost it, her desperation was naked and ugly. And you, Robert turned to Snow, need to leave as well. Immediately. Mr. Dorhang, please, I can explain. There's nothing to explain. You came to my house, accepted my hospitality, and attempted to sexually assault my son. The fact that you ended up in bed with me instead doesn't change your intentions. Snow looked around the room wildly, as if searching for an ally. Her gaze landed on me, and for a moment I saw the young woman who'd once been David's friend, before jealousy and entitlement had twisted her into someone unrecognizable. Grace, she whispered, please, You know, I'm not a bad person. I just wanted what you have. No, I said firmly. You wanted what you thought I had. You thought being married to David was about status and money and social position. You never understood that what we have is built on respect, trust, and genuine love, things you can't steal. No matter how elaborate your schemes. Snow's face crumpled again, but this time her tears seemed more genuine, less self-pity, and more actual remorse. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I'm so sorry. I know you are, but sorry doesn't undo what you tried to do tonight. David spoke up from beside me. Both of you need to leave now. Helen, you can collect your things tomorrow when I'm not here. Snow, I don't want to see you again. Ever. But David, we've been friends since we were children. But children grow up, Snow, and some of them grow up to become people who plan sexual assaults when they don't get what they want. Helen made one last desperate attempt. David, please. I raised you. I was there for you after your mother died. Doesn't that count for something? David was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with the complexity of his emotions. Helen had been in his life for over 20 years, whatever else she was. She'd been a mother figure during his formative years. It counts for something, he said finally. It counts for the reason I'm not pressing charges. But it doesn't count for enough to keep you in my life. The finality in his voice seemed to break something in Helen. She looked around the room one more time at the husband who was divorcing her, the stepson who was cutting her off, the daughter-in-law she'd tormented, and the woman she'd manipulated into her own destruction. This isn't over, she said, but the words lacked conviction. Yes, it is, Robert said quietly. It's completely over. As Helen and Snow gathered their things and left the Jang estate, hopefully forever, I realized that my life was finally beginning. After 5 years of being made to feel inadequate and unwanted, I was free to be exactly who I was, a woman worthy of love, respect, and happiness. But the story wasn't quite finished yet. There were still consequences to be faced. And Helen Jang wasn't the type of woman who accepted defeat gracefully. The real test of our marriage was just beginning. The silence that followed Helen and Snow's departure was different from the tense quiet that had dominated the evening. This was the peaceful silence of a storm finally passing, leaving clear air in its wake. Robert had walked them to the door personally, ensuring they left the property completely when he returned to the guest bedroom where David and I still stood. He looked older but somehow more solid, like a man who'd finally shed a weight he'd been carrying too long. I owe you both an apology, he said, settling heavily into the armchair Snow had vacated. I should have seen what Helen was becoming. I should have protected you from her machinations. Dad, you couldn't have known David began. But Robert held up his hand. I could have and should have. Helen's resentment of Grace wasn't exactly subtle. Her obsession with grandchildren was becoming unhealthy. I chose to ignore the warning signs because it was easier than confronting my wife. I moved to the window, looking out at the manicured grounds of the estate. Tomorrow, this would feel like a different place entirely, the scene of Helen's downfall rather than the stage for her manipulations. Robert, I said quietly, what Helen did tonight, that wasn't your fault. You can't control other people's choices. But I can control my responses to them, and I should have shut down her treatment of you years ago. He rubbed his temples, looking every one of his 62 years. Grace, I need you to know that Helen's opinions about your marriage, about your worth as a daughter-in-law, About your ability to have children, none of that ever reflected my feelings. Thank you, I said, meaning it. That means more than you know. David had been unusually quiet since Helen and Snow left, and I could see him processing the evening's events. The plan had worked perfectly, but I suspected he was grappling with the emotional aftermath of cutting Helen out of his life. Are you okay? I asked him. I think so. It's just... She raised me, Grace, for all her faults. Helen was there when my mother died. She helped me with homework, attended my school events, celebrated my achievements. He ran his hands through his hair. I know what she did tonight was unforgivable, but it's complicated. Robert nodded. It is complicated. Helen wasn't always like this. David, when I married her, she was kind, generous, genuinely caring, but over the years, she became harder, more focused on status and appearances than on actual relationships. What changed her? I asked. I think she realized she'd never be my first wife. She'd never have the position your mother held in this family, David. And instead of accepting that and building her own legacy, she became obsessed with controlling yours. We talked for another hour, clearing the air about years of family dynamics and unspoken tensions. By the time we finally headed home to Brentwood, it was nearly 2 a.m., and I felt emotionally drained but oddly hopeful. The drive home was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. It wasn't until we were in our own bedroom, finally safe in our own space, that the full impact of the evening hit me. We did it, I said, sitting on the edge of our bed. We actually did it. David nodded, loosening his tie. Helen got exactly what she wanted. Zhang family grandchildren on the way. She just didn't expect them to be her husband's children with another woman. Do you think Snow will actually be pregnant? Probably. Helen had her on fertility drugs, and my father is, well, let's just say his track record speaks for itself. David's expression darkened. God, Grace, when I think about what they were planning to do to me, to us, I stood up and went to him, wrapping my arms around his waist. But they didn't. We stopped them. We turned their own plan against them. You were incredible tonight. The way you spoke to them, the way you finally stood up for yourself, I've never been more proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you. This plan, this courage, you gave me that. We held each other in the quiet of our bedroom. Two people who'd weathered a storm and come out stronger on the other side. 3 weeks later, the first shoe dropped. I was working in my home office when David called from his law firm, his voice tight with tension. Grace, Helen's filed a police report. My blood went cold. What kind of police report? She's claiming we drugged her and Robert, that we orchestrated some kind of elaborate sexual assault scheme. She's trying to flip the narrative and make us the criminals. I felt sick. Can she do that? Do the police believe her? They have to investigate any complaint. But Grace, remember, we have everything on video. Helen's own actions, her own words, her own plan. The evidence is overwhelming. When do we need to talk to them? This afternoon. My lawyer will meet us at the station. Grace, don't worry about this. Helen's desperate, and desperate people do stupid things. This is just going to make her situation worse. David was right. When we met with Detective Sarah Martinez at the Beverly Hills Police Department, we came armed with hours of security footage that showed exactly who had planned what. Detective Martinez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, watched the footage with growing amazement. So Mrs. Helen Zhang is claiming that you two drugged her husband and orchestrated his sexual encounter with Mrs. Snow Liu. That's correct. Our lawyer, James Park, confirmed, despite the fact that the video evidence clearly shows Mrs. Zhang planning and executing a scheme to drug my client, David Zhang. And this Snow Liu, she was a willing participant in Mrs. Zhang's plan. The footage speaks for itself, David said. Snow knew I was married. She knew the plan was to get me intoxicated. She participated willingly. Detective Martinez paused the video at a particularly damning moment. Helen clearly slipping something into David's wine glass while looking around to make sure she wasn't observed. Mrs. Zhang, your stepmother-in-law, was attempting to drug you with the intention of having Mrs. Liu take advantage of you while you were incapacitated. That's correct. And instead, you switched places with your father, who was legitimately intoxicated from alcohol consumption. Yes, my father drank the wine that was intended for me. He wasn't drugged, he was just drunk. Detective Martinez shook her head. I have to say, in 20 years of police work, this is one of the more creative revenge schemes I've encountered. Detective, James interjected, is my client in any legal jeopardy here? For what? Outwitting someone who is trying to facilitate his sexual assault? No. If anything, Mrs. Zhang and Ms. Liu are the ones who should be worried about criminal charges. The meeting ended with Detective Martinez assuring us that Helen's complaint would be dismissed and that she'd be recommending charges against Helen for attempted drugging and against Snow for attempted sexual assault. But Helen wasn't finished. 2 days after our meeting with the police, David's phone rang at 6 a.m. It was his father, and he sounded shaken. David, you need to get over here. Now, Dad, what's wrong? Helen broke into the house last night. She destroyed your mother's memorial garden and spray-painted some very unpleasant things on the garage doors. We drove to Beverly Hills in tense silence. When we arrived at the estate, the damage was worse than I'd expected. The beautiful memorial garden Robert had maintained for David's mother carefully tended roses. A marble bench, a small fountain had been utterly destroyed. Plants ripped from the ground, the bench overturned, the fountain filled with dirt. On the garage doors, Helen had spray-painted whore and murderer in red letters 6 feet tall. She's completely lost it, David said. Staring at the destruction, Robert looked haggard, like he'd aged years in the past few weeks. The security company called me at 3 a.m. By the time the police arrived, she was gone. Did they catch her? They're looking for her now. David, I think Helen might be having some kind of psychological break. This level of destruction, this rage, it's not rational. I was studying the spray-painted words on the garage. Robert, who do you think she's calling a murderer? Probably you, Grace. In Helen's mind, you've murdered her life, her marriage, her place in this family. The word whore was obviously directed at me as well. Helen's final attempt to brand me as the villain in her story. But Helen had made a critical error in her rage-fueled vandalism. She'd committed multiple felonies on a property equipped with state-of-the-art security cameras. Mr. Zhang, a Beverly Hills police officer, approached us. We've reviewed the security footage from last night. We have clear images of the perpetrator, and we've issued a warrant for Mrs. Helen Zhang's arrest. 3 days later, Helen was arrested at LAX, attempting to board a flight to Hong Kong. Apparently, She'd planned to flee the country rather than face the consequences of her actions. But the biggest surprise came a week after Helen's arrest. I was in our kitchen making coffee when a wave of nausea hit me so suddenly that I barely made it to the sink. After several minutes of dry heaving, I sat on the floor, trying to figure out what I could have eaten that would make me so sick. Then it hit me. I couldn't remember the last time I'd had my period. With shaking hands, I drove to the nearest pharmacy and bought 3 different pregnancy tests. I took them all, then sat on the bathroom floor waiting for the results. 3 positive tests. After 5 years of trying, after being told my chances were minimal, after enduring Helen's constant criticism about my fertility, I was pregnant. I was still sitting on the bathroom floor, staring at the tests, when David came home from work. "Grace, what's wrong? You sounded strange on the phone." I held up the tests without saying anything. David stared at them for a long moment, then sank down onto the floor beside me. Are we pregnant? Very pregnant. Apparently, he pulled me into his arms, and I could feel him shaking. "Grace, this is incredible. After everything we've been through, after everything Helen put us through about children, the irony isn't lost on me," I said, laughing through my tears. "Helen spent 5 years telling me I was worthless because I couldn't have children. Now she's sitting in jail while I'm carrying her step-grandchild. What do you want to do? Do you want to tell people? Do you want to keep it quiet for now?" I thought about it. "I want to tell your father. I think he deserves some good news after everything Helen put him through. And Helen will find out eventually. But for now, this is our secret, our happiness. Let her stew in jail for a while before she learns that everything she wanted for this family is actually happening just without her involvement." David kissed me, soft and sweet and full of promise. "I love you, Grace Jang, and I love our baby. I love you too." As we sat on our bathroom floor, holding each other and planning for our future, I realized that Helen's elaborate scheme to destroy our marriage had actually made it stronger. We'd been tested in ways most couples never face, and we'd emerged victorious. Helen had wanted Jang family grandchildren, and she was going to get them. She just wasn't going to be around to enjoy them.